so much for joining us today. I'm Eka Ikwe. I'm based at the African Leadership Center at King's College London. I'm also one of the co-leads for the Cluster of Research Excellence on Creative Economies that is co-led by Rhodes University, University of Lagos, and King's College London as well. And this seminar is the third one in our seminar series titled Researching Creative Economies in Africa. It's the first one in the seminar series for this academic year, the academic year 2024 to 2025. It's important for me to note also that we're very fortunate to be supported by the Faculty of Arts and Humanity at King's College London to run this seminar series. So thanks very much to the faculty. And then a little bit about the seminar series itself. Our purpose and intention around this is to bring together a range of international researchers and academics exploring new topics and ideas around the development of creative economies in Africa. And we're aiming to hold about 6 of these seminars in this academic year. Please stay in touch to continue to get information on the seminars and what will be coming next. Please certainly, we'll put in a link to our mailing list where we'll invite you to subscribe to the mailing list as well, so we can remain in touch. That is if you're not already receiving our newsletters. And that brings me over to the purpose of why we are all gathered. I'm very excited that we have the privilege of welcoming Dr. Ezinne Ezepue, who will be speaking to us about her fascinating work to do with film, focusing on Nollywood. And so the title of the talk today is Gentrifying Nollywood, Examining Folklore, Regeneration, and Industry Shifts in Nigerian Cinema. If you permit me, I am going to say a little bit about Dr. Ezinne Ezepue, who is a lecturer of film studies at the University of Nigeria and is currently a postdoctoral researcher of African storytelling at the Internationale Filmschule. Forgive me, I'm sure I've not pronounced that properly, in Köln. Her research is funded by the Alexander von Humboldt and is focused on African folktale adaptation. Ezinne hopes to develop a toolkit for adapting folktales into contemporary narratives, which will address social problems and unseat stereotypes about Africa and promote positive identity. She holds a BA in Theatre and Film from the University of Nigeria, an MA in Film and TV from the University of Birmingham, and a PhD in Media Studies from Birmingham City University. Before her research interest expanded to African cinema and storytelling, Ezinne research on the Nigerian film industry, Nollywood, on which she has published both books and journal articles. So I'm certainly very excited to listen to this presentation, and I will be handing over to Ezinne shortly, who will speak to us for about 25 minutes, and then we'll return to our audience to please offer us some questions, comments that we will explore in the next 30 minutes after that. But let me encourage you, as Ezinne is speaking, or Dr. Ezepue is speaking, please feel free to add in your question and comments in the chat. I believe we also have a Q&A tab. Feel free to put your comments and questions in there, and we'll pick those up when we come to the Q&A session. Okay, so having said that, I will now give the floor over to Dr. Ezinne Ezepue. Please, it's an honor to have you here with us, and we're really looking forward to hearing about your fascinating research. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Professor Eka. Just a thing to point out, I haven't published books. Maybe I've published book chapters so that someone doesn't go looking for me. I'm looking for a book that I've published. But yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here. And today I'll be talking about my research on the gentrification of the Nigerian film industry, but essentially, just briefly, just to give an update on that, but mostly about my current research on folklore adaptation and how gentrification might be playing a role in that scene as well. So if you permit me, I'm going to be reading off my paper, because if I start talking through with just my slides, we're going to stay here another 3 hours. So I'll share my slides and then we'll get started. And thank you to everyone who is joining us today. Okay. All righty. Can we see my slide?
Yes, Ezinne, I can confirm we can see that.
Awesome. Okay. So my research interest in Nollywood, the Nigerian film industry, began about 2013, and there were hot movies at the time that I really wanted to see, but I had no access to them because they were not readily available in the market on DVD. So there were films like Through the Glass, EJ, The Figurine, Tango With Me, and amongst others. These films were released unconventionally to the big screen and not straight to DVD as was the norm at the time. At this time, cinemas in Nigeria were still making a comeback, and there was no cinema close to me. I lived in Enugu, not Enugu town, but the university city. I was the university town of Nsukka, and the only cinema close to me was in Enugu town. I had to drive like 40 minutes to get there just to see a film, so it wasn't sustainable. And so, even after the cinema run, it still took a while for some of these films to be distributed via DVD. I became curious about shifts in the industry, especially around how cinema films gave more appeal than the straight-to-DVD films, both visually, aesthetically, and otherwise. I was curious about these shifts in the industry. So as I began my research in 2015, my PhD research, I read from authors like Lobato, Jedlowski, and Bod about divisions amongst film producers in the industry, where a group preferred or approved of the informality which characterized the industry at the time, while another group sought for formalization of practice. By formalization, they wished for a filtering off of the negative elements that hindered advancement of Nollywood. These negative elements manifested in all aspects of production of the industry, both as unprofessionalism in production, unstructured and informal distribution, and chaotic consumption aggravated by piracy. So following the video boom in Nollywood around 2004 and 2007, the industry experienced disinvestment and economic decline, special thanks to distribution crisis warranted by distribution framework proposed in 2007. The modus operandi at the time, that's low budget, straight to DVD distribution, quick production turnover, was becoming redundant and unprofitable. So as Jedlowski noted, for filmmakers who understood the business of film at the time, a new formula was required to be more profitable. And this new formula required a bigger budget, fewer releases within a year, and wide organized international distribution via cinemas and DVDs. And then when it comes down to local distribution, it starts at the cinema. So hence the long wait for audience members like me. Changes in production and distribution brought about class labeling, betting the so-called old and new Nollywood, ultimately separating filmmakers and consumers into classes. And I pondered on these trends as possible gentrification of the industry. Gentrification first applied to urban studies means the renovation and transformation of neighborhoods previously occupied by working class to suit the taste of middle class or the upper class as well. Gentrification was introduced in 1964 by Ruth Glass, who was a Marxist sociologist, and he described significant transformations in neighborhoods of Notting Hill and Islington. These cities were actually, this picture is a before and after image of Notting Hill Gate, right, in London. This is one before gentrification and the other after gentrification. So these cities were experiencing gradual shedding of their working class traits, changing into tasteful localities, accessible to much more financially buoyant persons who can afford to live and work in them. according to Glass, once gentrification starts, it never stops. It just keeps going until all or most of the original working class occupiers are displaced and the whole social character of the district is changed. Gentrification has been discussed in many fields, from race studies to agriculture to sexuality, cultural studies, television studies, and many more. So it made sense for me to adopt it. Actually, it's been accepted as a neologism. So I was comfortable adopting it in my studies of Nollywood. In my study of the Nigerian film industry, I adopted the concept of gentrification as a metaphor to capture the change in Nollywood's modus operandi. As a metaphor, gentrification of Nollywood captures an increase in cost of production as a result of influx of richer, young film professionals. It captures the displacement of filmmakers, films, and our audiences. It also speaks to grandeur, appeal, acceptance of Nollywood amongst Nigeria's middle and upper class, both at home and in the diaspora. I explained that the industry, which became popular in the early 1990s, was originally created to meet the entertainment needs of the working class. Authors like Jonathan Haynes observed that consumers of Nollywood film at this time were largely housewives, the unemployed, essentially everyone who had a lot of free time on their hands. So by gentrifying Nollywood, that meant an evolving film economy being dispossessed of its informalities and in the process of being incorporated into the formal political economy. The idea of a gentrifying Nollywood has been criticized on the grounds that Nollywood is too young to be subjected to a gentrification study. But as a metaphor, gentrification is already in progress because this industry that was cheaply created to serve the entertainment needs of the working class has now attracted elite attention. Besides now creating content that serves all classes, Nollywood engages the interests of national, international, and multinational corporations. Some defining traits of gentrification, which prompted my adopting it as a neologism, is in the study of Nollywood transformation, include this following: target, initiator, gentrifiers. I'll just run through this briefly because I'll still come back to it much later in the course of my presentation. A target is often a marginalized or vulnerable entity. Here, Nollywood, even though it's a popular industry, it was underfunded and it was neglected. So it's a target that is open to gentrification. The initiators are usually the investors. For Nollywood, there were lots of private investors who were investing their money, and they were mostly businessmen. And then eventually there were corporate sponsors, and then once in a while the government chipped in as well. Now, gentrifiers are largely young professionals who with slightly more money than the people who were previously in the industry. Gentrifiers come in three waves. The first wave will include young, daring professionals who attempt to formalize the industry by themselves. At this point, at the early stage of Nollywood, we had people like Kunle Afolayan, for instance, Stephanie Okereke, who invested a little bit more than the average Nollywood film world will have at the time, in terms of budget size. Then after that comes the second wave, gentrifiers, and then because the first wave will always come with a little bit of formalization, that formalization or sanitization sort of attracts the second wave gentrifiers, who will be like corporate organizations. In Nollywood, we had Bank of Industry, for instance, who became impressed by what people like Kunle Afolayan were doing, and then they were investing. And then after that comes the third wave. The third wave gentrifiers for Nollywood, where you have multinational corporations like Netflix, for instance, who have seen that there is a little more sanity in the industry, there's a lot of formalization, and then they're willing and then to invest. So the interaction between all of this, these three key points, that target, initiator, and the gentrifiers, will then set regeneration in progress, cause a spike in service cost, class separation, and then class movement, and eventually have displacement or dislocation beginning to happen. At the time of my fieldwork in 2016, displacement could already be observed. Filmmakers were availing themselves to further trainings within and outside of Nigeria, upgrading their skills to match the changes that were occurring. From my interaction with industry players at the time, there was growing concern over possible displacement for filmmakers who didn't upgrade their art. As cinemas and distribution platforms such as MultiChoice or Iroko TV at the time, those were the active ones at the time, as they sifted great films from poorly made ones, displacement occurred in distribution. Other filmmakers argued that this was not displacement because there were other windows for distribution for service member that would service members of the audience who were not provided for by the cinema. All right, who were not provided for. Okay, I'm losing my talk. Okay. So filmmakers argued that this was not displacement because there were other windows for distribution to service members of the audience who were not provided for in a particular window. For example, there was still DVD distribution at this time to cater for audience members who couldn't reach or afford the cinema. But I read this as metaphoric displacement for films themselves, not audiences, which were being considered unfit for the cinema or other top-tier distributors at the time. Remember that previously, films produced in Nollywood saturated the DVD market across the country, reaching popular audience within few days of release. There was no class division or categorization based on budget size or caliber of actors featured or types of stories told. All films went straight to DVD and saturated the market within days of production. In 2006, anyways, some filmmakers I interacted with assured me that the DVD market will continue to thrive, so no audience will be displaced. But during my interaction with the renowned filmmaker, Lancelot Emaswen, he was very confident that DVD market could never die. For although it was not as profitable at the time as it used to be, it still had a market. But other filmmakers, for instance, like Lawson's, they said to me that DVD market was already dead as at 2016. But now, Mr. Emaswen, just like many other Nollywood filmmakers, has a YouTube channel. Now, the straight to DVD release is completely displaced. This invariably displaces audiences whose consumption medium is only the DVD. Unlike in urban gentrification, where displacement can bring about homelessness, some consumers are left unserved. Of course, these consumers get to migrate to other distribution channels, but at a higher cost. So if they don't have enough money to meet up to this new consumption platforms, they are completely left out of the show. So I concluded in my research on that. I concluded my research on gentrification of Nollywood with the observation that Nollywood is professionalizing its practice, and at the same time, it's gentrifying itself. I noted that while young professionals are making their entry into the industry, already existing filmmakers are attempting to improve their art to remain relevant and efficient. The general state of marked improvement in production value, visual aesthetics, narrative content that I observed in 2016 has expanded and spread across the industry, attracting third wave gentrifiers like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, amongst others. I didn't pursue this research any further anyway since 2018 when I finished, until I became interested in reimagining folklore for the screen. But anyways, further research is required in this area because I'm quite curious about if there's any filmmaker that has been displaced because of the changes that the industry had been undergoing in terms of higher costs of production, displacement of DVD, and shifts in consumption patterns. So by 2020, I was tired of my students submitting cliché story ideas in my scriptwriting classes. And I decided to point them to folklore for inspiration. It became a journey for me trying to figure out a guideline for student scriptwriters to reimagine existing folk stories into new, compelling, and appealing narrative, which are also socially relevant. Initially, I saw this as an opportunity or as an important move towards conserving folklore inspiring young creative writers, cushioning unemployment, and also countering stereotypical narratives about our society, people, and identity. But since starting this research, I've noticed a growing interest in reimagining African folklore. I have also begun to interrogate how reimagining folklore into contemporary film narratives might gentrify African folklore, especially given multiple gentrifiers already in place. So again, gentrification here is adopted as a metaphor to query this resurgence of folklore into film, where traditional narratives meet modern storytelling techniques. From reading film texts like Hula for Lions, Anikulapo, Remy Weeks' His House, Nikia Tuyusu's Nani, and CJ Obazi's Mami Water, among many others, I perceived an infusion of regenerative elements, which not only foster cultural gentrification, but gentrifies narratives for new and different audience targets. So I shall discuss gentrification. I shall discuss folklore gentrification under these two headings: cultural gentrification and narrative gentrification. Reimagining folklore holds two possibilities for cultural gentrification. On the one hand, it revives cultural stories like I anticipated from the onset of my research. Through reimagination, folklore can be preserved in the film medium, keeping them alive, right? Updated and relevant in modern discourse. It also allows for wider consumption of African folk narratives, serving not only the opportunity for a nostalgic callback, but also projecting traditional myths, beliefs, ideologies, and identity markers to contemporary and diverse audiences. This I read as a chance to reflect on history, whether written or oral. It's also a chance to update the narratives based on social realities and counter stereotypes and biased assumptions, and spark community bonds with it when similar interests on heritage are explored. For example, CJ Obasi's Mami Water resonated not only amongst West African communities, where the Mami Water goddess or the water goddess is revered, but it found interest among Afro-Brazilian communities and the Caribbeans. On the other hand, however, revitalizing folklore potentially exposes them to the risk of uncensored commodification and reconstruction, which may result from pressure to fit them into the modern or meet commercial expectations. This sometimes results in the erosion of cultural traces or representations which are undesirable to the folk. For example, this scene. So I think I don't know if, let me try and play that. This scene is taken from Anikulapo, Kunda for Lions at Anikulapo. All right, I'll just keep going while it plays. Okay, so this is a sex scene between Queen Arolake and her lover, Saru, in which Arolake's nakedness was exposed. Now, writing for Oyo Insight, a critic argued concerning the Queen Arolake. This character went out in the middle of the night to rape a man and she did not know, a queen. Even if the idea of a one-night stand has been permeating the Yoruba sociocultural life, it could be substantiated amongst persons that enjoy loose movement. What is the need of the nude scene if the culture is the Yoruba traditional life? He added, Yoruba, most often than not, would be under the clothes when copulating. While the critic speaks for the traditional Yoruba, this folklore has been adapted to satisfy the viewing pleasures of a modern audience. The critic here found it unrepresentation of traditional Yoruba life at the time setting of the film, and also an implausible and doubtful occurrence in an Alaafin's office, Alaafin's palace. The folklore imagination then can result to reinventions, which sort of distances the recreated version from the original cultural context. Okay, I'll go back to here. in terms of narrative gentrification, reimagining folklore into commercially successful or compelling narratives often requires that only marketable and visually appealing aspects are highlighted or infused where they do not exist, presenting the danger of erasure of subtle or complex cultural meanings. Example is the portrayal of the powers and abilities of Apeth in his house. Let me see. Oh, this is Apeth, and this is the film, His House. And this character is Apeth. Now, the Apeth among Dinka people could be found around Sudan. This film draws from Southern Sudan folklore, which has Apeth as a character. Now, among the Dinka people, as introduced by the anthropologist Leinhardt, is a man-eater. Neither Leinhardt nor Real is the woman, the female protagonist in His House. Neither Leinhardt nor Real's grandmother's folktale suggests that Apeth needs an intermediary to possess or consume a man. According to Leinhardt, the Dinka people will affirm knowing someone eaten by an Apeth or have someone claim to have been attacked by an Apeth. But Leinhardt gives no record of any Dinka person who claimed to have been an intermediary. Without denying the significance of Rael's intermediary role, I am questioning what this removes for the Dinka person from their cultural and narrative perception of an Apeth and its abilities to attack and eat a man. Also, the reimagination of these narratives as seen in His House or Nanny, the film Nanny, upgrades them, gentrifying them into new tales that are no longer accessible to the original folk. For example, the Apeth in His House presented as the Apeth in His House transforms from nemesis to a metaphor for the mental burden of traumatic memory and presents as a demon within people which shapes their action. So it's no longer what it used to be or what it is conceived as or perceived as amongst the Dinka people, which is nemesis. But now in this film, it embodies the mental burden of traumatic memory. Narrative gentrification seems to me like appropriation, and I hate to think about the creative process of reimagination as appropriation because His House contributes to making Apeth relevant in the contemporary social discourse, bringing it to new and wider audience and preserves the myth in film medium. But if we let's just consider that this is appropriation, just consideration. I'm not saying it is, but we're just considering that it is. If we consider it as an appropriation, we will understand how this can be interpreted as gentrification. Apeth served a spiritual society, right, where spiritual explanations are important for deserved and undeserved sufferings. A society where, according to Maya, theories of witchcraft are appealed to when they provide a way of pursuing or resolving human conflict. Apeth resided amongst the people who do not openly admit to being witches. Yet in His House, Rael informs her husband, Bo, of her interactions with Apeth, and by that, she attests to being a witch. But set in a society where established laws punish thieves, Apeth is robbed of its powers to eat Bo for the theft of Ngayak, their stolen daughter. It is then forced to seek an ancestry in Rael. Being an invisible actor, it reimagined to prey on invisible and intangible aspects of existence, including thoughts, emotions, conscience, trauma, or guilt. This way, it is understandable to a modern person in the UK who can relate to the inner demons, but not an invisible witch that lurks in the dark, waiting for a thief to steal. It is set in a society where members of the audience would have known a certain person who has stolen but has not been eaten by an Apeth. Hence, their pet is recreated for a new class of audience and distributed on a platform that's accessible to this class of audience, and then isolate the people to whom a pet was an original, or we say is an original. Although my interrogation into folklore gentrification continues, I have been greeted with similar gentrifying elements as I found in my study of Nollywood, from the target to the gentrifiers and some unavoidable outcomes. First, they are targets. Like in urban gentrification, where rundown neighborhoods occupied by low-income working class are at risk, the original forms of oral, traditional folk stories, which are at risk of disappearing, occupying the vulnerable target position. As for initiators, African film industry experts Tambe Obenson asserts that in recent times, there is unprecedented interest in Africa's screen sectors from outside and from within as well. In terms of financiers and investors, there is local and international interest in Nollywood and other national film industries on the continent. There is the famous Africa Folk Tales Reimagined, the collective on Netflix, comprising of 6 short films funded by Netflix and UNESCO. This is good. It is really good. It means more stories can be told. It means more diverse audiences are exposed to African folklore narratives, but availability of fund is an important factor in gentrification. For the gentrifiers, among the gentrifiers are, or rather it comprises of the young professionals. These films that I've mentioned, all right, from Aniko Lapwort to Mami Water to His House or Nani, they are all directed by young Black filmmakers. But I need to point out here that my idea of gentrification or gentrifying has nothing to do with Black or white divide. On the streets, according to Hankins, gentrification has come to be understood as white folks deciding to move into Black neighborhoods or invest into Black arts to reshape them and to reshape their values or standard, or reshape them to their values or standard. Although Black and white narratives oftentimes cannot be escaped, of course, because a lot of the money comes from the global North. There are drivers within the continent and its diaspora. I, for one, have given workshops on folklore reimagination, so I'm also aiding and abetting that. As in Nollywood gentrification, the interaction between these factors are both, you know, from the targets to initiator, gentrifiers, and the rest. These factors above will set folklore regeneration in motion, transforming the nature, structure, and narrative makeup of these folk tales or folklore in the course of making them adaptable to modern audience and times. I will conclude this seminar today, not with certainty that African folklore is gentrifying, but with multiple questions occupying my mind as I progress with my research. I have questions like, while reimagining African folklore, how does what is saved amount to conservation of this folklore? How should folklore regeneration be read? As a preservation of traditional folklore or as the making of modern ones? What will be the implications of cultural and narrative gentrification of African folklore? What will be the displaced, and what will their displacement mean for African folklore? So there are multiple questions that are going on in my mind around possible gentrifications of folklore and what this might mean for the continent or the different countries that are involved, or from where these folk tales have been taken out of for reimagination. So my research continues, but so far, this is where I'll stop, and I welcome questions, contributions, ideas, suggestions. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I hope I kept to time.
Thank you very much for that, Ezinne. That was truly fascinating. You've given us at least some 25 minutes
Awesome.
to interact with you for questions. So colleagues, please feel free to put those questions into I think we have a Q&A tab or in the chat. I'll try and keep an eye on both of those, and Ezinne will do her best to pick which questions to speak to, but feel free to send those through, please. So Ezinne, while we wait for those questions to come in, maybe we can I can offer some to just sort of get the juices flowing around your really fascinating work. So maybe I'll start with something that came up towards the end of that conversation. And I think through the talk, you've danced around this a little bit, but someone with a critical political economy background, I want to perhaps take this head on. So you make a really interesting point around narrative gentrification and the choices or decisions that are made around. I think I liked how you mentioned this. What is amplified because it's marketable and appealing. And I guess in that, I'm curious about marketing and appealing to whom. So from your work, I guess I'm interested in what is the center in these endeavors, right? And you hint at this, or what I would connect it to is something else you say about where finance and capital is coming from. Does that play a role in determining when we say elements that are visually appealing or marketable find their way to the top in the retelling, right? Or in the conservation? I know that's a question you have in mind. Who decides what appeal means? Who decides what is marketable? Does that depend on who is financing? So if Netflix is resourcing some of these endeavors, if UNESCO is resourcing some of these endeavors, then is that where the market is facing? Does it have to be, okay, what is appealing to a Western audience? Is that what we mean? Or is it speaking to, I mean, it's film, multiple audiences. So that was one. I mean, I hope, that is offering something for you to reflect on. A second point I wanted to talk about is the place of diaspora, and does that complicate how we think of West African, how we think of what is local, what is national. You made an interesting point about the appeal of Mami Water to, I guess, a historical diasporan audience. And we know that in belief systems, the notion, the idea of Mami Water resonates across, the Americas. So does that problematize how we often think of global North and global South? Do you see that as shaping these conversations? Where do we locate the diasporas in these reflections? I hope those make sense. I see a question here as well from Roberta on pushing the metaphor on gentrification. And she's wondering whether there's any resistance to that. In urban studies, gentrification is often fought or questioned by the original occupier. And, do you see any of this resistance or criticism to this logic or notion of gentrification? So maybe we can leave those with you and interact on that. And colleagues, please feel free to send us additional questions and comments as we begin the conversation. Ezinne, I'll hand it to you.
All right. Should we start with the appealing part? Who determines what goes into a film? I have in the past spoken with a few persons, especially those whose film. Okay, we'll start with the early Nollywood and how the stories have always flown around about film financiers, like those who pay the bill, determining what sort of stories need to be told and how these stories need to be told. And of course, it's not just about what you've written, it's about how they want a story told. But of course, right now, we've spoken to filmmakers, especially those funded by the multinationals, who are saying that they have no influence on what we do. And of course, I don't know, that could be believable, considering that some of these films are not funded from get-go, but they are produced and then they are acquired by Netflix or Amazon Prime and all of those. So it is a possibility. But then you know that at the end of the day, your target audience determines the story you tell. You have an audience in mind. I remember that when I was speaking in 2016, while I was speaking with filmmakers, including Köln for Line, they always say your audience will determine what you tell. And what you tell will determine the budget and all of those. So that everything is connected to one another. They know that there is a new crop of audience, especially those who are targeting diaspora audiences, you're thinking what they think or what they want to see or what they would like to see. And these are the things that would determine what you put in your film. For instance, this nude scene or nude scene that we have seen that I showed from Anikulapo, it met with a lot of backlash. And people were quarreling up with that it's very unrepresentational of Yoruba life, at least not Yoruba life of the time. If it was something about the everyday person and not the queen, that would be acceptable. But this does not represent. But the truth is, there is a target audience he has in mind that is not of the traditional time period. It is a modern audience and who are used to seeing certain kind of things. And of course, it's also a thing that we see in Nollywood film these days that's quite disturbing, whether almost every other scene, someone is making out, someone is kissing, there is nudity and all of those. But this is what the audience want to see. And every filmmaker wants to do something that will appeal to this audience that they have in mind, of course. So I'm not saying that it's the financiers who determine. I wouldn't say it might be obtainable in those Nollywood of those days where marketers will tell you what they want to see or what will sell. But we've also heard stories about, especially at the time when films were funded by a multi-choice, DSTV, and they will say, oh, they tell you the kind of things they want to see. They give you ideas of what you could put in the film. And of course, if you don't put these things, they will decide they can't fund your films and all that. So yeah, it could be either ways. I haven't interacted with filmmakers at this point about this in modern times, but of course, I've spoken to some filmmakers who have produced or whose films have been acquired by Netflix, and also the filmmakers who made the folklore reimagined on Netflix, and they said Netflix did not inform or influence what they put in there. Of course, they submitted their ideas, they pitched their ideas and they liked it, but there was no forcing them to pander towards a certain direction. So I think that sorts that. And then let's come to Roberta's question about, she said, I'm wondering whether there is any resistance. In urban studies, gentrification is often fought by the original occupiers. And I wonder whether you see any resistance to gentrification, the gentrification process in the industry. Is that's what you mean? Like a resistance to the industry gentrifying? If that's it, well, I think I would say I'm the only person who is like pursuing that gentrification thing, and I do not see any resistance to it because no one is actually agreeing that gentrification is occurring in the industry. I remember speaking to them and saying, audience members, especially the original audience members who are sitting in this comfort area of films are released and the very next day or day after or a couple of days after I have it, they are feeling disenfranchised because these films are going now straight to cinemas and they are not being catered for. And they said, well, we make for certain audience and there are people who produce for this audience. So they always agree that there is no disenfranchisement going on. But right now we see that of course, especially since DVD is now out of the show, is now completely taken off. And films, the cheapest way or the easiest way you can get films to consume would be pay TV, for instance, where you get some bouquets as low as 1,000 naira. I don't know if that's still the price right now. For start times, you could get at the time, some time ago, at 1,000 naira per month. But of course, given the erratic nature of our electricity and the sort of hardship going on in the country at the moment, some bouquets go as high as 37,000 naira, and then average the minimum wage is 70,000 naira. Imagine taking 37,000 naira out of your 70,000. It's not sustainable at all. So it's a question of there could be people in Nigeria at the moment who do not have access to these things. YouTube becomes another way, but of course you have to think about internet service. If you're watching that on your TV, you have to think about smart TV and all of those things. Well, why I haven't seen any scholarship that sort of tries to counter or try to fight against, or industry persons saying no one is actually taking say, I haven't seen any sort of indication to say that we are fighting against this. It's not happening, but I think it's a good thing for the industry. The only problem is displacement to continue to happen, and it's not the filmmakers' fault that audiences are being displaced. The only thing is we have to find a way to cater to these people, because they have to see our films. They have to see these films that are being made. Like, I want to see them. I won't always be able to go to Enugu City to watch films all the time, but I want to be in Nsukka and be able to have access to this. All right. I didn't quite get to the other one. You were asking about the transnational or the diaspora, right? If you want to repeat that.
Yes, Ezinne, I was asking about diaspora, but we have 3 questions, so I think don't worry about that. We can pick that up separately. Let's delve into the questions that have been offered in the Q&A page, but I'm happy to read them out. A first one thanks you, of course, for a great presentation from Jen, and asks whether you think that there's a way to expand audiences without gentrification happening.
Good question. It's possible. I think it's very possible. I remember at the time Nollywood, before gentrification began to happen in Nollywood, while we're still distributing our films through DVDs and all that, we were circulating across Africa and beyond. Gentrification hadn't started happening at the time, right? But we're still growing. But at the end of the day, it's about sustainability. It might not necessarily be sustainable, might just keep sustaining just the audience we had at the time, but we might not be able to reach other classes, because DVD will eventually, gentrification in the media is usually technology implicated. So when one technology moves, filmmakers have to try to adjust to the new technology. And as cinema came back, filmmakers were adjusting to that. And then over time, everyone got weary of DVD. Now I wouldn't say it would be unfair to say it's up to the consumers to try to match up. But in a situation where you have economic problem, it's just like saying you are in a slum or you live in a slum, and then there's influx of rich people coming in, and you say, try and make some more money. They can't make some more money. If they were able to make some more money, they would have made that a long time ago, right? Now, there's no way to expand audiences or grow new kind of audience, especially when you're looking for a higher class, a different class from the lower working class, that gentrification will not occur. But you can keep circulating or expanding within a particular class. But the moment you decide to go to a different class, then definitely there will be displacement, especially since gentrification within the media is technology implicated, because as you go from class to class, technology moves from class to class as well.
Thank you so much for that, Ezinne. Actually, you addressed another question I had, which was the role of technology in all of this. We have a question from Oluranti, who asks, who profits when producers use folklores in film, indigenous people or script writers? We have a final question after that, just to note that. Okay.
That's a very good question, actually. It's a very, very good question. But I think I like to, so if I look at my interrogations around narrative gentrification, right? I think I wouldn't say the people, actually I think it's a win-win for both, depending on how the folklore is reimagined or adapted. If it's simply adapted, like say for instance in Mami Water, where the water gods on Anani as well, where the water goddess is brought into our modern society, our modern social reality, right? It's giving relevance in our social reality in modern world, and then it's put out there in film where it's accessible to people who do not know what water goddess is or what Mami Water is. It's a win for the people. It's a win for the folk. Right, because now more people get to know about that. And this is one of the things that my research is driving. How do we get to counter biases about Africa, our identity as a people and all that, and then use these stories that we're bringing out now to counter those negative or stereotypical narratives that's already existing about us. Before now, they might not necessarily know the good side of Mami Water, but with this, with this sort of stories, they get to know that, oh, there is a different kind of story. There's a different kind of narrative or mama water that they do not know about. So this, for here, it is a win for the people and their folk tale, their folklore. But there's also, when it's reimagined in a way that the cultural nuances or subtle nuances of the culture of the people becomes lost or becomes overridden by the creative reimagination, then it becomes a problem, just like I tried to explain using his house or the apeth in his house. I haven't spoken to a Sudanese person to understand who knows what a pet is in the traditional sense, to understand what the film has done to them in terms of their relationship or their understanding of what an apeth is. Has the power of an apeth been watered down in this narrative, or has it been given a different interpretation for what they understand in terms of their culture or their cultural relationship with this? So in a way, it could win. It could be a win for the filmmaker. Now Remy Weeks is celebrated because his film is really beautiful. Actually, I like the reimagination of the apeth. It's really amazing. On Netflix, it's gotten some awards from that. So that is a win for him as well. It's projected him as a great storyteller. But for the people, I do not know what this means for them. And in terms of the younger generation on having a new knowledge of apeth versus what the culture always have understood an apeth to be. So it could be win-win depending on the context.
Again, Ezinne, thank you so much. I think, again, you've answered another question I had, which was around the decoloniality of knowledge and what role you see this conversation with, well, what you're offering us here, the use of folklore, does that allow us to center African knowledges and present these as legitimate, as important for understanding those spaces, but for understanding larger issues as well, and what are some of the complexities around that. So thank you for that. We have a final question here from, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing, Anulika, I think is what I see there, who thanks you again for a great presentation. And, I guess while recognizing the importance of centering the spaces you are looking at and researching those in and of themselves, which is hugely vital and important, is also asking whether you have come across any examples of narrative gentrification in other contexts, some in the global North, US and parts of Europe, and other parts of the global South, thinking of Asia and I guess India with reference to the large film industry there. And whether if you have come across those, don't have to have, but if you have come across those, are there any insights that you draw from those spaces?
Thank you, Anwali. I think this is a very fantastic question as well, and it's making my brain jolt as well. So I think the closest I've come to doing this is when I started looking at the film. It's an animation. It's called Songs of the Sea. It's beautiful, beautiful adaptation of Irish. I think it's an Irish folk tale. It's beautiful. But I haven't done that narrative gentrification comparative study between an African one. So far, I've been concentrating on the African folklores reimagined, both on the continent and in the diaspora. But this would be a very good thing to look at as well, to see if what differences might exist or what similarities might exist. Emily, thank you so much for giving me ideas.
Wonderful. The best kind of questions that offer tools for moving the work forward. So we have just 5 minutes to go. I think I think we can wrap it up here. I know, Ezinne, you have to leave us just on the hour as well. I would ask, do you have any final thoughts you wanted to share before we close off the seminar?
Nothing really, just that I don't know if there are scholars here, but we've been working on collecting African storytelling from different cultures, from different countries, and we're trying to compile them into a handbook to help scholars and students who might be interested in African storytelling. It's just a way to preserve what we already know, and also to begin to give voice, to begin to contribute our own thoughts and our own texts in that area, especially when we come to that conversation around decolonizing education and all of those. So yeah, I've spoken to Professor Eka about this, and if you sign up to their newsletter, you'll be getting information about our call to make contributions, especially from any part of Africa you are in. If you're in the diaspora, you're also welcome to contribute, because we're trying our very best to contribute our own voice, authentic voice to what African story is, African storytelling was, is, and it's possibly going to be in the future. So please subscribe to the newsletter and then wait for the information the next week or so.
Okay, wonderful, isn't it? Thank you. So another brilliant reason to subscribe to a fantastic newsletter that comes from the Cluster of Research Excellence on Creative Economies. Thank you so much for that, Roberta. There's a link there, so please click on that and join us. Then, colleagues, I think it's left for me to first of all thank Ezinne very much. Dr. Ezinne Ezepue, thank you so much. That was a fascinating study. I think many of us here are so intrigued to have heard it and really look forward to how that work continues to evolve. I love the conceptual work also about gentrification. And I hope the ways in which you're going to be able to make a contribution even on the notion of gentrification. What will you contribute to that conceptual and theoretical space? I'd be very keen to see that. I see a lot of material there that could help with that. But this is a hugely important industry you're working on, and one of the largest in the world, in fact. So I think hugely important work, not to speak of the decolonization of knowledge points that we made before. So thank you so much for coming, spending time with us and sharing that amazing work. And then, of course, to our audience, thank you for taking time of what I know must be very busy schedules to sit with us and to listen, to interact, for your questions, your comments, and for being here. And thanks very much to my colleagues that have organized and put this together. Roberta, I see you. Thank you so much for that. Sebastian, I think you might still be here from the ALC. Thank you so much for that, to Jockey as well. Colleagues, thank you. And we will be back with another seminar. Please subscribe to the newsletter so you can find out when the next one will be. We will look forward to welcoming you here again, but get in touch with us for anything else you want to, you think you might want to do with us, ideas to present, join us again. Thank you all, and look after yourselves. Have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Professor Eka. Thank you, Professor Roberta.